Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shadowproof YouTube channel. I'm pleased to be here. My name is Kevin Gosztola, and I'm the managing editor for Shadowproof.com, also the curator of the Dissenter newsletter, which I welcome you to go to and subscribe at thedissenter.org, and I'll have more on that at the end of the show. But pleased to have with me to discuss the latest with Julian Assange's case. It's Chip Gibbons, who is with Defending Rights and Dissent. Thanks for joining, Chip.
Always a pleasure to do this live stream, Kevin. That's why I keep coming back.
Yes, and
I think you're always on my live stream too. I think we swap it up. Whose live stream it is this time?
There's cross pollinating, and wherever it happens, there's always a live stream where you'll find both of us. That's basically the story here, is that if there's a live stream on Assange, or if there's some sort of event on this, we're familiar faces who just keep popping up. You can't get rid of us. So
I've been on this for 12 years. I think you have too.
This has been the last decade, and it's really time for it to come to an end. And that's why we're having a conversation here today, because this is more discussion of the passage of time, of how we are at this 4-year anniversary where Julian Assange was expelled from the Ecuador embassy. He was arrested. The British police hauled him out of the embassy with the permission of Ecuador. Obviously, they were invited. Yeah, they were invited to come inside their diplomatic outpost and drag him to a van, and then he was put in Belmarsh prison, where he's been held there, at first under a highly political charge, but after serving a sentence for that, then he's there without bail as the U.S. pursues a political case against him around the Espionage Act charges, around a computer crime charge that is connected heavily to the Espionage Act offenses. And so you're here today, and we're going to just go over some of the developments over the last week or two in Assange's case. I suppose we should begin with what we can say definitively about this moment in the Assange case, which is that there's a lot of movement, and the opposition among politicians, among elected politicians, is probably higher than ever before. Not necessarily here in the United States, but we're seeing letters from the United Kingdom. We're seeing we saw a letter from Australia. We see a letter from Brazil, and we know there's a letter from Mexico officials who are in Parliament.
Yeah, and we know both letters from Mexico and the U.S. are coming this afternoon.
Right. Yes. So there's a letter with some members of Congress, and these letters are all very similar. These letters are all very identical, but they make important points to U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland to drop these charges. And perhaps you want to say what fundamentally is the case that's being made to Merrick Garland to drop these charges.
I know with the U.S. letter, the fundamental case is a First Amendment case being made. It is about the fact that every single press freedom group has called on the Biden administration to halt this prosecution. It is about the fact that when Donald Trump brought the indictment against Julian Assange, they put the First Amendment in the docket, right? If Julian Assange is brought to this country, it will not just be him on trial in the Eastern District of Virginia. It will be the future of the First Amendment. It will be the future of the freedom of the press on the trial. I'm a bit distracted right now. I was on the Hill this morning doing a last-minute push for this letter that's supposed to come out today. I have about 3 different messaging apps open in front of me. I'm getting updates from different people who have different sources of info on the Hill telling me who has finally said no to the letter, who has finally said yes to the letter. When we started this broadcast, we were at 5, And now I've just gotten word that we may be at 6 people on the letter, although the 6th one is not officially confirmed yet. But we know there will be a letter later this afternoon led by Tlaib with Bowman, Jamal Bowman of New York, Cori Bush of Missouri, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, and AOC also of New York. So pretty much the squad, if you will, have put together this letter. It was put together in conjunction with civil society groups who work on press freedom issues. It is stronger of a letter than I would have ever have expected from the U.S. Congress. The U.S. standards for the U.S. Congress are different than what I have for other people, unfortunately. But it is a very strong letter that does not mince words about the First Amendment issue and does not mince words about how we have to drop this prosecution. And I think that's particularly amazing because while I think Julian Assange is one of the greatest journalists of the 21st century, I think WikiLeaks is a phenomenally important project. Of giving this sort of platform for whistleblowers to come forward and give information anonymously. I also think that WikiLeaks was a breath of fresh air at a time when a lot of people like myself were frustrated with the corporate media for the way they sold the Iraq War. That's not the dominant opinion at this time in the city that I live in, Washington, and it's not the dominant opinion on the Hill. So you really have to move people to care about the First Amendment aspects of this, who have a fundamentally different take on Assange and WikiLeaks than a lot of us do. And I think that it's been a reasonable effort. I mean, in the Democratic Party, the 2016 leaks are still looming very, very high, and they scare a lot of people from joining efforts like this, even though Amnesty International and the New York Times are on it. So it's a really difficult political climate. I had one office tell me that it's easier to talk about Palestine on the Hill than it is to talk about Julian Assange. It's not easy to talk about Palestine on the Hill. I used to do stuff with Palestine on the Hill. I don't anymore. And those were really difficult conversations. So I'm glad I've moved into something even more difficult to talk about with politicians than Palestine. I didn't think you could do that. I don't know, but apparently you have. So we have 5 people who are courageous enough to stand up against all of this, to stand up for the First Amendment and do the right thing and put out this strongly worded letter, and to do so in conjunction with letters in the UK, with letters in Australia, with letters in Mexico and Brazil. And I don't think people necessarily realize how historic that is. US Congress people generally don't join international efforts, and all of the letters were organized independently in their own country, but everyone knew that others were working on them. So you have this situation where you have members of Congress coming out in an organized way for the first time against this prosecution, and coming out in a sort of organized way with their international colleagues. So this is a double day for history on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, it's a big moment, and I'm having some kind of internet connection issue. So I'm going to see if I can fix it. But
it's finally you this time and not me. That's great. It's always
me. No,
I've
been getting picked on lately, which if, depending on how conspiratorial you want to be, you want to wonder if something's going on to make it impossible for you to do live streams. But I try not to think like that and focus on doing the work. But I realize I'm very pixely right now. What tends to happen is everybody can hear me clearly, but they can't see me when I'm speaking. So normally when I go to share this, then I stick like this image over my face so that people don't have to look at the like scrambled eggs type look that I have. But anyways, back to this very important issue. It's like you're describing what I think is a very positive development, because we didn't have this kind of movement over the last few years. It's really good that is taking place. And if you go,
it's made possible by activists. Like this has been pushed the biggest thing that happened was the Progressive International brought the Belmarsh Tribunal to Washington, D.C., and there were people from the Hill in the audience that day, and there were people from the Hill who met with some of the delegates for the tribunal, and that got the commitment to the letter. We had been working since June of 2021 on trying to get this letter going, and we couldn't find anyone to do it. And within one day of the Progressive International bringing the Belmarsh, actually the day before, bringing the Belmarsh Tribunal to Washington, we had the letter solidified. So huge thanks goes to the Progressive International. I also know that people in their districts have organized meetings with their members of Congress, have gone to town halls, have organized call-in days. I met with a group of grassroots activists on the Hill this morning who were traveling offices as part of a last-ditch effort to get them to sign on. And I know people who work for DC NGOs who are texting me, who know members of Congress, being like, okay, deadline is 2:30. I'm calling them one last time now. A member of the UK Parliament made some appeals to people that were apparently persuasive. So this has been an incredible effort, years in the making. When the first indictment for conspiracy to commit computer intrusion was announced on April the 11th, 4 years ago, Defending Rights to Dissent and the Whistleblower and Source Protection Project at Expose Facts went up on the Hill and met with individual offices about that indictment. And then, of course, they brought the Espionage Act indictments. We added that in. But from the first day this was brought, we've been up on the Hill. And I can tell you that the situation we are in, as dark as it is right now, with Julian and Belmarsh for the fourth year, with all of these revelations about all of this illegal activity by the CIA, we are in an incredibly different place. We are nowhere near where we need to be, but we are moving in that direction. Yeah, so and Kevin is asking me about how the Espionage Act reform efforts fit into this. That's a really good question. When we were having these early meetings about Assange, Tulsi Gabbard's office, which a controversial office, I have mixed feelings about their office, particularly since I worked with them and I can tell you what it's like working with them. And they asked for a bill about the Espionage Act, and we wrote one for them. They introduced it. And then, when we started working with Tlaib and Omar on this issue, they asked for the same thing. What is legislative language that would fix this problem? And we gave them the same language that we gave to Gabbard, and we made some improvements to it. And Tlaib and Omar introduced it as an NDAA amendment. That amendment was blocked from reaching the floor by the House Rules Committee. But the thing about an NDAA amendment is that if it's ruled in order, and it wasn't an order amendment, but the reason for ruling it in order was bullshit politics, not anything that was real. It would have triggered a floor vote, a once in 110-year floor vote on the Espionage Act. So this entire process has been a journey. We've in the process, we've talked to offices about Daniel Hale. This is where the efforts to pardon Daniel Hale on the Hill, where Ilhan Omar has spoken out about, they've come out of these types of meetings. So we've spent a long 4 years on the Hill educating people about the Espionage Act, educating people about the Assange case, educating people about the Daniel Hale case. And I know we can look at these letters where it's 20% of the Australian Parliament and say, oh my God, we only have 5 people on our letter. But I'm telling you, it was a fight to get those 5 on there, and we are making progress. And I would not give up. The Assange issue has never been an easy issue. It's never going to be an easy issue. But if we don't fight for this issue, we're not going to win. We could fight our hardest and there's no guarantee we will win. But if we sit back and do nothing, then nothing will happen and he will languish in that prison. And I wouldn't say I'm optimistic right now because the situation is so dark, but I know that we are building a type of movement slowly, but we are building it that we need to get him out.
It doesn't appear to have made a single difference as to what
I like this look on you, Kevin.
I attempted, but everybody can hear me.
The impressionist painting of Kevin.
That's what does this do for the image? It's probably will make people want to leave this stream even faster than they were leaving before. So
the Impressionists, Kevin. They were so proud of them at the Musée de d'Orsay when I was in Paris.
It's like pointillism, right? It's like a mosaic. There's a mosaic of my face.
Effect, yeah.
Which, you know, the U.S. government doesn't like the mosaic of information that WikiLeaks has published that gives everyone a full picture of what the U.S. government does in all of its different agencies, from its security to its diplomatic agencies. But yeah, so I know we have a few people listening, and let's talk a little about the CIA backed spying of the Ecuador embassy, which remains a prevalent issue that there's a lawsuit that we've covered. I've had an opportunity to do a couple interviews tied to my book, Guilty of Journalism, the political case against Julian Assange, where it's been possible to, you know, just make it clear that I think what we have yet to fully uncover, but we have little bits, it's enough that there should be some kind of an investigation in Congress into the role that the CIA was playing in supporting, or at least communicating or following or cooperating, however they want to describe it. I'm obviously aware of plausible deniability and how they wanted to make it seem like they had nothing to do with it. But we are seeing evidence that that UC Global was in communication with the CIA, and El País has published a story in the last couple of weeks. So I'll go ahead and put that on the screen so people can see this article. The Spanish company that provided the CIA with information leading to Julian Assange's arrest, UC Global, El País in Spain, covered some emails from the owner of UC Global. That's David Morales, who's been charged with crimes in Spain. And it shows that they were selling data to the U.S. intelligence about Julian Assange's legal defense strategy. Now, you know, we've been told that even if this was true, that this happened, that there's nothing to worry about because it's all walled off. All the information that was collected, if in fact it's even in the possession of the CIA or other U.S. agencies, it's not going to be a part of the prosecution against Assange. And so this seems to call into question whether that is in fact the case, that if you read through, we have them describing the head of operations wrote a message in December of 2017. That's an important date in the timeline. That's an important day because in that time, they were closely following what was taking place in Ecuador embassy, because there was a significant movement with the support of Ecuador to get Julian Assange a diplomatic passport so he could potentially leave the embassy. And we know that that was thwarted by the United States. We also know that that's about the exact same time that they drafted the charge, the computer crime charge against Julian Assange, that was sealed against him. So we have this email that is described in this article from El País. In particular, we see this. It's very late. Because it's so big, I put the file in a shared Dropbox folder. Someone with experience in audio can make it more intelligible. Then they say the ECU is referring to a person named Rami Vallejo, who is the head of SENAIN in Ecuador. That's Ecuador's secret service. And so so they're referring to the head of SENAIN. The ECU is quite audible, so you can hear this official from Ecuador, but the others, Julian Assange and Stella, are very muffled, he's telling. This is a technician writing this to David Morales. And then this data is sent in the early morning hours to, as they describe repeatedly, the American friends. The American friends are not Quakers in Pennsylvania because they're the American Friends Service Committee. No, it's the CIA. These American Friends are not peace activists. They're quite the opposite. And this information is being passed along constantly to people who Morales has called his American friends. So this is something that I think should drive further attention to what happened with the Ecuador embassy.
No, you're absolutely correct. And another thing I will just throw out there is you mentioned he was originally arrested for bail hopping. We know from the Yahoo News story that had all of the bombshells about his assassination attempts. So that sort of took precedence here. We know that the bail hopping charge was brought at the request of the White House. Originally, Assange was in the embassy trapped because there was an extradition request from Sweden where he was wanted for questioning in a preliminary investigation that he was not and never charged in. But after the Swedish government comes and questions him at the embassy, something the UK government mysteriously worked to prevent, right? They claim they want him out of the embassy, but they also encourage Sweden to not get cold feet and then tried to prevent Sweden from interviewing him in the embassy. That when Sweden drops that extradition request, the British brought the bail hopping request, which is officially the thing he was arrested for. We found out from Yahoo that request was the genius plan of an unnamed White House official. So the U.S. has had its hands in every part of this.
And we're waiting to learn what the response will be from Richard Roth, who is the attorney for Margaret Ratner Kunstler and Deborah Herbeck and Charles Glass and John Getz, who has these four visited Julian Assange while he was in the embassy. They were subjected to surveillance, targeted, and they had their belongings rifled through. They were taken at checkpoints. They were monitored. There were some of the people from the U.S. who visited Julian Assange who were monitored very closely and had their privacy violated, and they're challenging that in court. We don't know what the response is going to be exactly from Richard Roth and these plaintiffs that are suing Mike Pompeo in an individual capacity, as well as the CIA, and then also suing UC Global and David Morales. But we know that the CIA's argument for why this case should be dismissed, the U.S. attorney who is making these arguments too, we know their arguments are essentially that Julian Assange was a target. The U.S. security state was interested in Julian Assange. They should have known that their privacy would be violated if they were in the Ecuador embassy trying to speak to somebody who was a wanted fugitive. And basically they say that because he was being looked at as a potential violator of the Espionage Act, that makes it so that anybody who he communicated with could be incidentally targeted by anything that the security agencies were doing to go after Julian Assange.
Yeah, and they also make the case that there's no Bivens remedy. Bivens is I'm not an expert on civil litigation, but Bivens is a court case that was brought against government officials, and it allows at the federal level people to sue for violations of constitutional rights. At the state level, you would bring litigation under a statute called Section 1981. It's one of the Reconstruction era laws. It allows you to sue people acting under the color of law for violating constitutional rights, violating federally protected rights. The federal equivalent of that for federal officials comes from a court case called Bivens. And one of the things that they argue is that there is no remedy in civil law for people who have their rights violated as part of foreign counterintelligence collection overseas. This is pretty big argument, since a lot of abuses that happen historically have been done through this quote unquote national security or foreign counterintelligence collection. Foreign counterintelligence collection is for the most part not regulated by statute. There are statutes like FISA that regulate, wiretaps, physical searches, I think pen registers, thanks to Bill Clinton. But in general, foreign counterintelligence collection is conducted not pursuant to any congressional statute, but to Ronald Reagan's Executive Order 12333. This was one of the big controversy in the 80s when people had tried to perform sort of domestic FBI surveillance, and the FBI was coming back and doing things like spying on Reagan's political opponents of his war in El Salvador, through a foreign counterintelligence investigation based on an executive order that didn't allege any violations of crimes, right? You have investigations into crime that requires evidence, although that standard's basically been eviscerated, so it doesn't matter anymore, of criminal wrongdoing. But then you have foreign counterintelligence collection, which is broad and nebulous and just conducive to an executive order.
Right, exactly.
But you can't sue for that. I mean, that's pretty bad.
Right, yeah. All right, so then one other thing I want to get to before we wind this thing down, and I think maybe we would have talked a little longer, but today, on this anniversary, I'm not supposed to have internet. That makes it possible for us to do this in a way that...
The Russians unplugged Louis Mensch's internet. Remember, of the marshal of the Supreme Court person?
Well, yeah, and also like at any moment, maybe one of my keys might be pressed down and just start like the space bar might just start like moving on its own because the GRU is in my computer.
Are you using a butterfly keyboard?
I don't know. I mean, just describing how people think technology works.
Yes. I had someone once who called our office because the DHS wouldn't let us open her email, or let her open our email from her. And the thing that offended her the most was that she had paid $50 for a firewall and they had violated the firewall. She didn't care they were violating a computer, just the cost of the firewall. I was unable to help her with that.
All right. So last week at Belmarsh, there was supposed to be a momentous visit by representatives of Reporters Without Borders, Rebecca Vincent, who is their international campaigns director, involved in operations for this press freedom group. That's perhaps been the most outspoken and strongly supportive press freedom group in the world when it comes to the Assange case. They had somehow done, well, the kind of work that you've done, Chip, on Capitol Hill. Not saying that Capitol Hill is like a prison, but I'm saying that like you have spent a lot of time setting up the ability to make this letter possible. It takes hard work. They had spent a long time trying to make it possible to visit Julian Assange in prison. They had been dotting their I's, crossing their T's. They had sent in all the information about the organization, what they wanted to do while meeting with Julian. They had secured what they believed would be the first visit by an NGO observer to Belmarsh to speak with Julian Assange and to have someone who isn't a part of his family see what his state is as physically and mentally, and to talk to him about what he needs and would like so he can fight this case. And it was pretty clear why they were going and what they wanted to do. And this is, of course, Belmarsh in London. And so they left Paris. I think his name is Christophe. He's the Secretary General of Reporters Without Borders. And then Rebecca, they were both going to visit the, I don't know how to say his last name, but you're French speaking kind of person. Is it Delors or?
The French pronunciation is different than the way it's spelled. It's extremely confusing. There's a lot of silent letters and
Deloire. It's Dloire anyways. So Christophe, I'll just call him Christophe, and Rebecca visit Belmarsh, or they plan to, and they find out as they visit that they have been denied and will not be able to enter the facility, and that the prisoner governor, Jenny Lewis, this is basically the warden. I'll call them a warden. That's the word we use in the United States. We don't call them prison governors. They're not running like a state or a city state or whatever. So the warden says that Julian Assange cannot meet with RSF people. And by the way, they also say that we think you're journalists and not people with an NGO.
What the fuck does that even mean?
Yeah, I know.
Like they wouldn't let Chris Hedges attend the wedding because they thought he was a journalist. Like what?
Yeah.
Usually journalists get special access to things. They don't get less access. This is a very strange world in Belmarsh.
All right. One of our viewers says Delaware for Christophe Delaware. Thank you for helping us get to there. So, so I don't know. They all of a sudden they say, well, we think you might be journalists, which, okay, you've been talking about organizing this for the last week and a half, but we shouldn't, obviously this is all done in bad faith, as they recognize. And so I just wanted to play some of their remarks at their press conference so people can see, get a flavor of, what went on here with Reporters Without Borders.
We followed all rules this morning. We're there very early with all required documentation. Without even checking our documentation, we were told that we would not be allowed in. The first official that we spoke to said that they had received, quote unquote, intelligence that we were journalists, and therefore we would not be allowed to visit. No further discussion was possible. We were informed that the decision had been taken by the prison governor directly. We requested several times urgently to speak with the prison governor. That was not responded to. Nobody should spend a single day in prison for publishing information in the public interest. In these prison walls, Julian Assange has now become the most well-known political prisoner in the world. So we continue to campaign for his release as a global priority. That's what we wanted to discuss with him this morning. And we wanted to see how he was. We have deep concerns about his safety and well-being. At each stage, it's a default to secrecy and sort of preventing us, again, from doing our jobs as press freedom defenders normally. So thank you for coming today, and I'm sorry that we didn't, as RSF, have more information about Julian and his well-being, but we will keep trying to get into this prison, and we will keep up our campaign to free Assange and to support Stella and her family and the wider community working together for his release.
Julian was very upset that he wasn't able to have a meeting with Gosztola and with Rebecca. He had important things to discuss with them. This decision by UK authorities to prevent this meeting from happening is ludicrous. It's an arbitrary interference with Julian's freedom of association with Reporters Without Borders, which has been probably the organization campaigning the loudest for his freedom for many years. We are now about a week away from the 4-year anniversary of Julian being inside Belmarsh prison. Julian's presence in this prison is a scandal. It's a scandal on every level. How is it that they can prevent him from meeting with the Secretary General and the Global Campaigns Director of Reporters Without Borders? This is a shameful act. He's fighting, but his physical state is deteriorating by the day, because that's what happened when you lock a person up for over 20 hours a day and restrict his visits and interfere with his mental state in this arbitrary and cruel way. But obviously he's trying to fight back, and he's trying to fight back, including by being able to have meetings with his allies. And that's what was attempted today, and that was what was outrageously interfered with and prevented.
We came as an NGO, as NGO representatives to visit Julian. So clearly the official explanation of this denial of access is not sincere. It was decided and communicated with bad faith. This is another evidence that in this case of Julian Assange, nothing is never normal. Julian Assange has made a very important, a crucial contribution to journalism. He made possible the revelations of war crimes, we call on the United States to put an end to this legal proceeding.
All right. So you've got to go see how things are going on the Hill.
I've got news from the Hill.
All right.
When I started this broadcast, I said there were 5 signatories on the letter. Tlaib, Omar, Bush, Bowman, AOC. 43 minutes later, we are at 7. We now have Presley and Greg Cesar from Texas on the letter. So we have 7 people on the U.S. letter, which is actually pretty impressive based on where we started at. So that's why all these beeping keeps going on in my background. Everyone from the Hill is texting me, other advocates, other activists with news. And I'm sitting here doing a whip count while live streaming. Apologize to the audience, but I figured you probably like these updates.
No, I think it's embracing the live format. You've got things developing, and at least, I think bells ringing are a lot better than not being able to see my face.
I'm a big fan of impressionist painting, Kevin.
Okay, all right.
For you.
All right. Yes, well, and I was just in London for a week, so I got to enjoy the National Gallery. So I'm familiar with some of these artistic styles that you're speaking about, Chip.
Yes,
that,
excellent.
Yes.
I always aim to improve your level of cultural achievement, Kevin.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I believe it was you who encouraged me to take in, and maybe next time I'm in DC, I'll take in some of the artwork that's on display there. So
you can go see the Picasso painting of the circus people. We have that
Yeah.
Picasso painting. Whenever I'm in a city, I always demand to see their Picasso painting because somehow there's a Picasso painting in every city. And in DC, we have his circus people from his Blue period, I believe. We also had an entire exhibit, an exhibition of Picasso's Blue period paintings, which I got COVID at.
Okay, so let me ask a question, just because someone mentioned a name that is always on the tip of the tongue of progressives. And I just want to ask if, based on your experience at Rights and Dissent, you doing this work to organize a letter, you're doing it in the House of Representatives. And I imagine it's much, much more easier. And there's willingness and potential there to get something like a letter. But like the US Senate, that must be daunting and pretty impossible. I see people asking why isn't Bernie Sanders on a letter? But can you tell anybody about this is House of Representatives?
Yeah.
Why doesn't something like this happen in the Senate?
That's a really excellent question. I mean, when the indictment was first brought, Bernie Sanders did a tweet, something like, Donald Trump shouldn't ruin the First Amendment. Elizabeth Warren said, Julian Assange is a bad man who has harmed U.S. national security, but Donald Trump should not use him to create a precedent against the First Amendment. And Ron Wyden also said something similar. And I believe Rand Paul has been maybe good on this issue. I know he was back and forth on Snowden. I don't know why there isn't a Senate letter. I would, if Bernie Sanders or Ron Wyden or Rand Paul or Elizabeth Warren is your senator, I would call them and send them Tlaib's letter. I think Senator Sanders feels very constricted. This is me hypothesizing. This is not any insider information. So please don't go and say Chip Gibbons said, Bernie Sanders said, because I'm just doing my own analysis here. I think he feels very constricted because, and I'm not saying this is right. I'm just explaining what I think is going on. Not that I think this is justifiable or good. I know sometimes when people give explanations of other people's behavior, people think they're sanctioning it. That's not the case. I think Senator Sanders feels very constricted because even though he did more to elect Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton did for herself, there's still this never-ending narrative that he somehow sabotaged her campaign and gave the election to Donald Trump. And the biggest barrier to getting people to speak out in Washington for Julian Assange is the sort of hostility or fear that stems from the 2016 DNC revelations, which, were journalistically worthy. The DNC tried to sue WikiLeaks. The lawsuit was blocked on First Amendment grounds. Robert Mueller investigated, found no evidence of a crime. I know all the facts here. I've told people all the facts, but so please don't kill me as the messenger here. But a lot of people on the Hill are still very, very, very upset about those revelations. And I think that people who aren't upset by them are very afraid that they could be tarred with them, especially if they're in the progressive part of the Democratic Party. And, someone from the Clinton wing could come out and go, ha, we told you. They helped throw the election. They're working with these Trump, Russia, Julian Assange web of conspiracy. Which is bullshit. There's no such web of conspiracy. But I think that's what people are afraid of. And I think Senator Sanders is particularly afraid of criticisms that he somehow gave us Donald Trump, even though, the DNC did everything to sabotage him as a candidate. And he probably would have done a lot better against Trump than Hillary Clinton did. And even though he did a number of campaign events for Clinton, and from my vantage point, probably did more to help elect her than she did for herself. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right in my view. And you look at like the Columbia Journalism Review, which ran the series earlier this year about the press and Donald Trump, and examined what was happening at places like the New York Times, over at like Slate, let's say. The Washington Post was another place. There's other outlets that were going 100% all in on anything that was leaking out of the Mueller investigation, leaking from the Justice Department, leaking from Congress, whatever it was being fed to them. They were believing it almost very similarly to how they believed a lot of claims that came out, or ran with a lot of claims that came out ahead of the Iraq invasion, which happened like 20 years ago. So there hasn't really been a postmortem. That's what Jeff Girth made clear in his series for the Columbia Journalism Review. I encourage people to go read this. Actually, I'll put this on screen again just to like give you a break from my mosaic face. You can go find this at Columbia Journalism Review, and I'll scroll up to the top here. And this was over at this site on January 30th, The Press versus the President. And it goes into quite a lot of detail. It's very long. There's like 30,000 words here. It's, basically like a couple chapters in a book. And so if you want some more detail there, that should give you some more perspective on what we're talking about here in the politics in Washington, that it's making it difficult in order to build support for Assange. But then, you look outside the country, we finally do see some movement in the UK with politicians. I know that there are journalists there who I respect, independent journalists that have been outspoken for Assange, who've said, well, the media here and politicians here are just ignoring Assange. So it's good to have quite a few people there. I think there's several dozen parliamentarians there that they were able to get on that letter. In Australia, you have something like 88% of the people who are not opposed or either think that Julian Assange should be returned to Australia, his home country. There's movement there. Of course, the problem in Australia is the government believing that there's only so far they can go in their advocacy for Julian Assange. Right or wrong, whether they're telling us this in good faith, whether this is some kind of a smokescreen, you want to believe that they're advocating for Julian Assange, but this might be a case where they know that they can only do so much because it's more important for them to be a close ally of the U.S. and work on things that involve foreign policy in the region. And so whether it's political or whether it involves geopolitics, the message you can take away from what Chip and I are talking about is that there are these constraints that are bearing down upon Assange and making it hard for him to survive. And the only way that we can affect the way in which this all unfolds is by continuing to do this work, by struggling. So the lobbying that Chip does, the writing and reporting, and then everyone here who tunes into the stream, who shares conversations like this, who shares conversations that are much better in quality with others so that they can enjoy them, find interviews, find things like the Al Jazeera English Fault Lines documentary that was recently done to kind of mark this 4th anniversary. Find some of the documentaries that have been done on the CIA's role in this case and share those with people so that they know exactly what's happening with Julian Assange. And you share some of the testimony from people who are family of Julian Assange, like Stella, his wife, like John Shipton, his father, Gabriel, Julian Assange's brother. Did we get another signature? Anybody else join, Chip? How's it going?
No, we're trying to get an 8th person on board who is being fickle.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have to add another sentence for them, you should consider it. I'm here to tell you, Chip, that they should be allowed to make their mark on this letter.
Yes. Kevin is referencing an incident where
I don't know anything. I'm not trying to put anything on the record. I promise. Okay.
Nothing is on the record.
Everything's off the record here.
This isn't off the record. No one saw this. Yes, I'm delirious enough from doing this all day that I almost started telling the viewers about the incident that you were not referencing because you don't know what it was, that I'm not supposed to know what it was either. So
I don't know. Let's go back to talking about paintings in national galleries.
Yeah, Picasso. Yes. Every city has a Picasso painting. In DC, we have the circus one. All
right. Now, this is a very serious matter, and I thank you for tuning into this broadcast to catch up on some of the developments. And we'll both be back soon. I'm certain we'll be back soon. I'm going to try to get John Kiriakou on here to have a conversation about something else that's happening that I know, Chip, you've probably been following, and maybe you have a thought or two about. But this intelligence leak that this material, this incredibly highly classified documents that just appeared in a Discord server, the Pentagon has no fucking clue how it ended up there on this Discord.
Have you heard the theory of what happened? I don't know if you believe the theory or not.
What's the theory?
That it was a video game chat fight about the Ukraine war, and someone, in order to like pull rank, published a bunch of classified information with their video game Discord they were arguing with. That story was in The Guardian today, and I had already heard it, and I don't know what I think of that.
That's incredible. What I'll say is the reason why I want to do a full video on this and have a discussion is because I put this in the conclusion of my book. I said that everybody could be guilty of journalism like Julian Assange because, you could have access to documents and you could just post them in any one of these like platforms, any one of these like chat rooms or whatever. And then what happened is the New York Times, right, I think ended up figuring out that they were here at this Discord, and then they reported them. And in the last 2 to 3 weeks, just based on these documents, there's been at least 5 to 7 different big scoops about the war in Ukraine that have been made possible because, and you're telling me it might have been a spat between people playing video games.
Sam is messaging me trying to figure out what the off the record stuff we were alluding to was, and all what he said, it is not what he is referencing. That Kevin doesn't even know that information, and will never know that information.
Yeah. Sam. Okay.
So chastising the viewers from in real time.
All right. Well, Chip, why don't we tell people where they can find your work? You got a newsletter. They should support you and follow it.
You should come to visit the website rightsanddissent.org if you think it's important that there is one group that cares about civil liberties and is in Washington, D.C. and is the voice of people all over the world and all over the country who think Julian Assange should not be persecuted for journalism. I would strongly recommend you support our work because there aren't a lot of other groups willing to do what we do. We're only a US-based group. We're a domestic group that focuses on domestic issues. But because of the international ramifications of the Assange case, we've started working with a lot of international NGOs, press freedom NGOs, some of which have US components, which are not as good as the international ones on this issue. And they come to us. So we are pretty much the NGO that holds down the fort internationally in DC on the Assange issue. If you think someone should do that, please consider supporting us because it does not make us very popular with a lot of people.
All right. And there's the URL for my newsletter. This is where you can go for the latest updates on Julian Assange's case. And if you're still here with us, like this channel, the Shadowproof channel, so you can get the alert for the next conversation that we do. And so until then, we'll talk to you all soon. Have a good rest of your day.
Have a good rest of your day.